The first phase started sometime in the mid-1970s. We're not sure where, and I'm not sure that really matters very much. The first phase was the silent phase. It's when the AIDS virus was circulating around the world, silently, unnoticed, undetected. Now, the second phase began in 1981 when AIDS was first discovered in the United States.
Well, I remember very clearly sitting in my office at the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda when I first saw the first June 5th Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
I remember vaguely seeing these reports and thinking, ooh, that's a bit scary.
And it was at that time that I got goosebumps of anxiety that we were dealing with something that was very ominous, that we didn't completely understand, that I wasn't quite sure where it was going.
Literally on my first day on the job, July 1st, 1981, saw the first patient with Kaposi sarcoma that had been admitted to the hospital just 2 days previously.
AIDS spread very rapidly in the homosexual community. It is not a homosexual disease.
Literally half of the gay men in San Francisco were infected with HIV.
1 week we had 2 cases, the next week we had 4 cases. By the end of the month we had 20 cases, and 2 of them were already dead, or 3 were dead. And it was devastating.
I don't think anyone who was not there then in this group of people can imagine what it was like. It was like literally being in wartime.
I was one of those people who didn't believe that the virus that kills fags, sex workers, drug users, and black people, I never believed a virus like that could exist. I thought it was Reagan's wet dream.
It was during that period, 81 to 85, that it became clear that this is a virus and it had a name, that we could test for evidence of infection, that there were many infected people, we knew how it spread, and the worldwide distribution of the virus also became clearer. Now, I kind of end that period in mid-1985 at the first International AIDS Conference, which was held in Atlanta in the United States.
We planned the first International AIDS Conference in Atlanta in 1985. And it began with a small group of perhaps 2,000 international investigators and physicians and other interested people.
There are new warnings tonight that the AIDS virus may have already infected 1 million Americans.
Heterosexual transmission of AIDS was a major topic as 2,000 scientists from around the world gathered today in Atlanta to discuss the disease. Scientists say they are making progress toward a vaccine against AIDS, but it is probably years away. The prospect is that the incidence of this disease, for which there is no cure, will continue to rise sharply.
Very rapidly, the press became involved in these conferences. And the conferences became an annual or biannual update of concern, not only of information.
À Paris, 2500 spécialistes assistent à la 2e conférence internationale sur le sida. 3 jours de pessimisme, même si l'espoir de trouver un vaccin dans les prochaines années reste très sérieux.
Yeah, initially, of course, there were no drugs against the virus. It was such a horrible disease that there was this enormous urgency to find treatments initially for these opportunistic infections that we didn't know how to treat or didn't know how to diagnose.
This last year saw approval of AZT, the first drug found to prolong the lives of some AIDS patients. But side effects prevent many from taking it.
So when AZT came, you had a clear indication that it prolonged the lives of individuals. So the glee, the excitement of it, that was very soon tempered by the fact that the result was very temporary. Weren't sure why at the time, but it was clear that after a while, when you give a single drug, the virus very easily developed resistance.
Researchers at the Third International Conference on AIDS learned how much grimmer the picture is today than it was just a year ago.
This convention finds 6,000 scientists mulling over 1,300 papers. For the most part, 1,300 examples of how bad AIDS is. Just a year ago, it was thought only about a third of the people infected ever would get sick. Time is proving that tragically wrong.
At that time, I was so surprised because I was used to go to medical conferences. And suddenly the vice president of the US, at that time was George Bush's father, he was giving a talk at the opening ceremony, and people stood up and started booing him.
Free speech, that's what it's all about.
I said, my God, they are booing the vice president of the US, and this is unbelievable. And then I started to learn about the role of activism in the fight against AIDS.
It was the first time that politics got into the conference. And I know that's controversial. I think it's absolutely necessary.
64 demonstrators were arrested by police wearing yellow rubber gloves, apparently for protection against possible AIDS infection.
We couldn't believe that the police were so poorly educated that they thought they had to wear, huge yellow kitchen cleaning gloves to protect themselves, which of course immediately spawned a cheer amongst the ACT UP activists of, your gloves don't match your shoes, they'll see it in the news.
What was essentially accomplished during 1985 through early 1988 is first that an agenda was established. We described AIDS in a way that focused upon not only the virus, but on the social and political and cultural and economic impact of AIDS. We explained AIDS to the world, if you will, as a development problem, not just a medical problem.
Despite the fact that I was medically trained and I should have, I think, been more aware than other people, I felt at that time that AIDS had nothing to do with me because as it was reported to be in San Francisco in America and I was living in Uganda, and at that time I was not at all related to anybody who was a homosexual or who had been to San Francisco, I felt that at that time that AIDS had nothing to do with me. So that when I was told that my husband had AIDS, my first reaction was disbelief.
How many of you think that from now on until you are married, you'll be able to keep away from girls and have no sexual relations?
I don't think I can manage because whenever I see a pretty girl, I forget all about AIDS.
At the Stockholm conference, there was a big influence of focusing on Africa and other developing countries. It was the first time when we had a focus on people living with HIV/AIDS.
As of the 1st of June of this year, there have been now 96,433 AIDS cases reported officially to the World Health Organization from 136 countries around the world. That's approximately double the number of cases that were reported at last year's conference a year ago.
The one thing that was lacking at those conferences early on were the voice of people with AIDS. And it was the fact that people with AIDS were not present, that their voices, their feelings, their demands were not being heard, that made us realize we needed to go there and make our presence felt.
On behalf of people living with AIDS in Canada and around the world, I would like to officially open the 5th International Conference.
It was incredibly empowering for people who stormed the stage, for the world to, be shocked into realizing that people with AIDS had rights, that their opinions and their thoughts mattered.
Worldwide, as many as 450,000 people may have contracted AIDS. As many as 5 million more people could be infected with the AIDS virus. Everyone has an interest in confronting AIDS. Everyone has an interest in making sure that this illness is beaten once and for all.
Why you don't? Why you don't?
Our fifth born son was a young man with a great promise. He had 5 lovely children, but he fell victim of the disease AIDS. But the best way we would wish to mourn this boy is by fighting AIDS.
And then after the 1989 conference, it was appreciated that the U.S. immigration policies were rather discriminatory, that they were interpreted as requiring people with HIV to declare their infection as they entered the country.
You have to remember how desperate it was then. There was nothing. There were no treatments.
People were dropping like flies. You could not walk down the street here in Greenwich Village without learning of somebody else. Somebody died, someone sick. It was a hideous experience. I'll never forget it. I'll never forget it. Nor do I want to. Nor should anyone else.
We faced a massive protest in San Francisco. The representative of the U.S. government, they wouldn't send the president, but they sent the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Louis Sullivan, who attracted huge protests. And I knew, and not very many people knew, that on the other side of the curtains, behind the stage, there were 300 police. So the sense of being in the middle of this thing, and with a barrage of sound, something like nothing I've ever heard before.
In a unprecedented, as far as I know, sign of solidarity between the scientific side of the meetings and the patient side, there was a resolution passed that said we will not hold these meetings in any country that won't allow the patients to attend the meetings.
And what that meant was that we couldn't have the meeting in Boston, and that in fact we couldn't have the meeting in the United States again until the policy changed.
I would like to welcome you as chair of the 8th International Conference on AIDS, the 3rd World STD Congress.
It's my pleasure to introduce Ms. Elizabeth Taylor, founding national chairman and co-chair of the International Committee of AMFAR.
Now is the time for the West to share its resources with information to those very countries where it could reap the greatest advantage in lives saved and lives extended.
The only promise and hope came in the guise of effective treatments and prophylaxis for opportunistic infections. We're literally digging into our soup cases and doling out medications to our brothers and sisters from the developing world And it's a lot of what I think made people like myself stand up and start yelling really loudly that every life matters, that every life has equal value, and that everyone deserves the right to health.
There was a lot of depression in Berlin, and really because the results of the Concord AZT trials showed that AZT did not work on its own to prevent the progression of AIDS. So people were very disappointed, very depressed.
In Deutschland sind rund 70.000 Menschen infiziert, weltweit schon 14 Millionen. Bundespräsident von Weizsäcker warnte in seiner Eröffnungsansprache davor, Kranke auszugrenzen.
Oft wird AIDS an Unmoral gekoppelt, ja gar als angeblich gerechte Strafe interpretiert. Das ist eine entsetzliche, unmenschliche Ausgrenzung von Kranken unter dem Deckmantel vorgeblicher Moral.
Es sei dringend notwendig, den Entwicklungsländern Geld für Aufklärung und Vorsorge zur Verfügung zu stellen. Denn ein Impfstoff gegen das AIDS-Virus ist nicht in Sicht. Die Forscher schätzen, dass dies noch 1 bis 2 Generationen dauern wird.
At that time, the conferences were still annual, every year. After the 1994 conference in Yokohama, Japan, they moved to being every 2 years.
The meeting was, in all fairness, was no news at all, and even worse news. I guess the spread of the epidemic, the lack of treatments, the death rates that were going up and up and up. I can still remember the annual general meeting of the society. Probably about 20 people and a dog turned up.
When we went to Japan or when we went to Germany, those were the sort of the valleys, if you want, in the fight against the epidemic. I mean, things were not working very well, but we needed to get together to make that statement, to regroup, recharge, and then move forward.
And the breakthrough, of course, came then in '96 in Vancouver with antiretroviral therapy, which revolutionized the way we're dealing with this epidemic.
Particularly with the discovery of the protease inhibitors and the use of multiple combinations, 3 or 4 drugs, did you have for the first time a dramatic effect so that the viral load went below detectable levels, and it really transformed people's lives.
Thank you for attending the 11th International Conference on AIDS in Vancouver.
This experiment is in progress. No patient has been cured. But we must find out whether it is possible or not.
I think that the developments we've seen are leading us to believe that many things that we once thought were impossible are now at least within the realm of the achievable.
It was just bliss. I mean, it was incredible.
AIDS is my life, it's my career, and having seen the epidemic unfold, having watched so many people die, and then seeing the world change so dramatically.
We have seen a growing list of accomplishments which has contributed to a renewed sense of optimism and hope that greater and greater control of HIV disease can be achieved.
And yeah, we overreacted. I was guilty of having tears in my eyes thinking about the possibility of a cure, and we still haven't seen that, but it's almost as good.
The theme of that conference, ironically, was one world, one hope.
Greed equals death! Access for all! Greed equals death! Access for all!
suddenly the theme One World, One Hope didn't really hold true. Suddenly people realized that it was two worlds and one hope for the rich world and everybody else watching and dying.
Okay, can you breathe? Get it out for me.
So 3 years ago, when I ended up sick in the hospital, I sort of thought that might have been my turn, because I had watched one friend after another get progressively sick and die. But I was just very lucky that I didn't get sick until the time that I did. And at that point, protease inhibitors were just around the corner.
Your viral load has jumped up again a little bit to about 28,000 copies.
I came home from my pharmacy one day and with a small bag of medications, but they were very expensive ones, and I decided to add them up. So I took my receipts on each of them and got on my calculator, and I said, my God, I brought home more than $5,000 worth of drugs for me today, in one day.
Right now, we have to be realistic that while certain advances in science, medical science, has occurred, the benefits will not accrue to the majority of people in the world because they're poor. It just simply costs too much.
In 1992, I started the hospice project in this temple. I asked for some money from the government and start the hospice project. Here we have a doctor, we have a nurse who can give them some medicine. But almost of our work, we like to look after them for die peacefully.
I feel very angry because in the rich country, they spend $25,000 per year for one AIDS patient. And here in Phnom Penh, we have only $10, even less than $10 for an AIDS patient per year.
Drop the price, you make me sick. Drop the price, you make me sick. Drop the price, you make me sick.
The gaps between North and South, and with therapy being so expensive now, still prevention is the most important tool to try to stop this epidemic.
We want more treatment for Latin America. We don't have access to the medical treatment for people living with HIV/AIDS.
Although people's lives have been dramatically changed for the positive, not everyone, you're right, a proportion of people, but nonetheless a substantial number of people, the thought of keeping people on therapy for 10 or 15 years is something that is going to be a very difficult concept to swallow because of the mounting cumulative toxicities. So I don't think it's bad news about triple combination. It's sobering news about the reality of where we are right now.
You'll note that we have the IS clock, that since we've been here, since the conference opened, more than 100,000 people have been newly infected.
HIV and AIDS has shown the whole world, even more than the world wars, that we have to do something about human rights. We have to do something about humanity, and we have to become human again.
If AIDS is not stopped, it has the potential of destroying even the human fabric upon which the economy and development of any country is built. And the AIDS is affecting people, is affecting emotions, is affecting the fabric which puts us all together. So it has the potential to destroy us.